Hello, everyone. My name is Shawn Plessis. Thank you for joining this presentation. I hope that you find the value and it helps you as you make decisions. If you're an IT leader or IT executive and you're responsible for the SAP landscape, then this may be you standing in front of the board and looking at everything and trying to make sense of the complexity of where you are today. I know it was a tough year this last year with COVID and mobile workforces, and it may have shifted some of your priorities in terms of where you need to focus on next. But I think the general sense for SAP customers is there is a concern. There's also not a clear understanding of what the path may look like for the future and when I should make some choices and what type of choices I have. I hope through this presentation to demystify, to bring some clarity to certain things that you most likely dealing with as every SAP customer is dealing with today. I know you have concerns in terms of the maintenance end date or the support end date of 2027 or 2030, or you have concerns about, how am I going to make this migration to S4 because SAP is forcing me to do that. And furthermore, you're trying to understand how you're going to make it work within your budget and within the ability within your organization to finance a charter like this, to finance a project like this. And so what I'm bringing to you today is some really good perspective of that. And it's very much an independent perspective. It's not what you're going to hear from SAP. It's not what you're going to hear from many of your SIs. It is something you'll hear from me. And I am a long-time SAP person. And so I'm hoping to do all of that for you. So sit back, relax, watch the video. And if you do at the end of this recording feel like there's still unanswered things, feel free to reach out to me at any point and I'll definitely help you through that. As a starting point, my name is Shawn Plessis. I run the global SAP operations for Spinnaker Support. I've been in the SAP space since '92. I've built my whole career on SAP as a product, and I really love the product itself. The company has delivered very well from providing a solution that many companies embrace and have implemented over the years. And I'm very proud to say that I am part of that SAP landscape as well. I run third-party support for Spinnaker. You may question, well, how does that work with that? But the reality is SAP is my lifeline, and it always has been. And what I'm doing now as part of Spinnaker Support is giving SAP customers just another choice or another alternative to prolong and hold on to their SAP assets and optimize those assets, but also to find ways that they can save money through the cycle as well. I'm going to be presenting to you a lot of different viewpoints and from a lot of different companies, a lot of independent companies like Gartner and Forrester and other players in this space as well, in terms of how they see SAP strategy. What does it mean to customers? This slide here that you're looking at right now is a Gartner slide. And basically, the slide is meant to present to you as a customer, as an SAP customer, what are the choices that you may have. In other words, what things can you do through this cycle? As you can imagine, you have a 2027 deadline for mainstream support and then a 2030. And this is Gartner's presentation. And basically what they're saying is, if you take a strategic option up earlier, you're going to have less risk. If you take a tactical option, which is, a brownfield type implementation, then, your risk goes higher as you go down the path. Change in ERP, we have seen customers in the SAP space. I never ever thought it would be so, but there is companies that are sort of scaling down on the SAP footprint and making different choices around their ERP space. And then, of course, third-party support is a viable option for every customer. The option there is to sort of stay with what you've got. It's working for you today. Save the money and invest in areas that are important to you. And then where the majority of all SAP customers sit is they're basically sitting and waiting and seeing what is going to happen down the path. We know that SAP has extended mainstream support time and time and time again. This is no different. It's not new to SAP. It's been around since the R3 days. And essentially the idea there is to sort of install some level of fear into you instead of having a real business case, but install the fear in a way that you have to upgrade. You feel like you have to upgrade. But companies are sitting back and saying, no ROI, I don't have the money to do this. There's no substantial benefit for me to do this. It's hard for me to justify this. And basically what they're sitting in doing is sitting back and waiting to see how this all works out. Will SAP extend? Will there be a large amount of customers that actually mature the model, mature the implementation? Will the resources become available? And will there be companies that can actually demonstrate ROI that they can use as part of their leverage to promote the project or the migration within their companies? I've taken a little bit of a different approach here and basically turned it around, because it all depends, as you as a company, how you may look at it. Most companies today think of their investment they've made in SAP as a solid investment, it's working very well, and don't really see the need to go to S4 or to S4HANA. They don't see the value in doing that. And so their risk is looked at it from a different perspective. As an example, third-party support, the idea, if SAP is going to pressure me to make a move, maybe I'll just save the money on my support fees right now, and I'll keep the engine going as it is, and I'll do it with a higher level of quality and high level of support behind that. And then the majority of customers are also sitting back there and saying, you know what, I'm going to wait. I see that as a least risk amount. I don't see it as, waiting till the end as the most risky. I see it as the customer has control of those dates. And quite frankly, if I sit back and wait for this all to prove out, then I am taking the less risky choice. And then, of course, tactical and strategic. Tactical is really just brownfield, and strategic is more taking a bluefield approach. In other words, do I redo my whole implementation? Do I start from scratch? And then, of course, change ERP. I do see that as a risk, because if you do have a working solution today, why would you want to go and pull that out and actually put a whole new ERP solution in? So we see that as more of a risky perspective. And so this chart is really meant to identify, or to sort of tell you, the longer you wait, the least risk you're going to put in place in your business, and it's going to make it easier for you to make a migration at a later point. Third-party support has been around for quite a while. It actually has been around in the SAP space since 2009. It's acknowledged by SAP, and it's acknowledged in the market today. There's many companies that have made the decision to move to third-party support, and Gartner themselves acknowledge that this is an option. If you're a subscriber to Gartner, you can ask Gartner about third-party support, and they definitely can give you some good insights about who's the players and what comes with it and how you should think about it. But according to Gartner, by 2023, this will be a $1 billion business. In other words, a very large percentage of SAP customers will choose third-party support and not move down this path. And it may be transitional. In other words, it may be one situation where it's for a period of time that they choose third-party support, and then make a decision later whether they move down the SAP path or they actually move to an alternative path. And of course, Gartner's seen a very large growing number of clients evaluating third-party support. It's becoming a normal discussion these days. Many companies, as they start to look at their IT roadmap and their strategies, they are looking into third-party supports. Of course, it doesn't work for everybody, but it works for many companies, and it is important that every customer out there looks at third-party support and understands what that means to them, and then see if there's a path that they want to choose differently to the way they actually decide the future of their roadmap. In terms of where we are today, SAP is pressuring customers to make the S4 migration. SAP is doing a lot of different programs like HEC and now with RISE. And the idea is they're trying to force their customers to move faster. They are dependent that their customers will move faster and start to adopt a new software and move in that path. This is the way they can secure the future of SAP's products. But the idea is, how many customers are really doing it? Now, you can go look at SAP's website, but here's the Gartner view. 74% of the existing ECC customers, and I always refer to ECC, because depending on business objects, BPC and Sybase and all the other things, ECC is really the core product. This is the big product that makes SAP what it is today. And essentially, many companies that are out there that are running SAP generally are running ECC, and they look at that as their critical app. 74% of these existing customers are still going to wait. Many of them are very large organizations, and they're basically just sitting back and saying, I'm not making any decision. I'm not going to be pressured into making any decisions. We'll go down this path and we'll make an assessment at a later point. 14% of customers went live with one component. And out of all those bullet points, there is one that I want you to understand. It's very important. The implementations or going live with one component hasn't really been in the ECC space, in the critical area. It's been in areas around that. It could be sandboxes or at least smaller parts of the business or other products like that. What we've seen is we've seen BW, we've seen CRM, but we haven't seen a customer that says, I have replaced my ECC with S4 and all the different modules to replace finance and materials management and order to cash and all the other parts behind it. So that area is one that customers are holding close to the chest and waiting to see what happens in the future. There is concerns, of course. There's concerns that, experience or skills, aging workforce from ECC, new workforce for S4. There's also concerns that there's not a lot of demonstration of success where many companies can come out and say, I have now officially replaced my ECC system. So you're not seeing that. So companies understand that, and they're basically sitting back and saying, I need some of this stuff to work out before I make any decisions going forward. Among both existing and new 40 to 50% S400 customers, 95% of live customers adopt private edition. Now, you would want to understand why would they choose that, but the reality is private edition is really the end game for SAP for you. As an example, you'll see in the later slides where I talk about what is it going to look like from ECC to S4 and what do you really get out of that. But the reality is all that happens there is on the S4, you're basically signing up to an implementation for an on-premise S4 system, which can be hosted anyway. And SAP would love to host it within its HEC program and with RISE with SAP, and then sort of clarify it or classify it as a cloud-based solution. But think about it this way, it's private, it's a hosted solution with managed services, and that is why 95% of the customers, because essentially that's what SAP is offering. SAP has, plus minus 600 small business that are running on public cloud. And the reason behind that, public cloud is, if you think about it, it's off-the-shelf type software. It's not your ECC comparison. So what that means to you is essentially it has limited configurable processes, and it's really bent for companies that have a standard back office process in terms of doing business. As you can see, they're in there. Why is all of this happening? What is the challenge in terms of customers having? What are they having a challenge in making the move? In the old days, when you moved from 4.5 to 4.6 to 4.7, my SAP and all that was not an issue. Many companies just said, hey, I just have to put it on a charter and we have to plan it and move that. Well, the big deal, this is not the same thing. This is going to require a relicensing event. It is going to require a migration. And, the idea of just going in the back end and upgrading the system, that doesn't happen for ECC. It's basically a new system with a conversion migration to take care of that. It is going to look different for some screens and that. They say 93% of the code is similar in terms of that. Yes, it's been streamlined around HANA, but the reality is the functionality is very similar to what you have in ECC, but it's a new system, new license activity, requires a new implementation, requires testing and training and everything that goes with that. It also requires customization and optimization. In other words, going back and looking at all your custom code and deciding how you're going to move forward with that, because S4 is not going to solve that either. And out of all of this, the biggest issue that customers are having today is they have not seen a killer argument, something that they can put on paper and say, this is the financial reason we're going to make this move, and this is what it means to us in the business. In other words, is it going to improve our efficiency, increase our business, or is it going to decrease the cost that it takes to support? And so from that perspective, customers have not been able to put it. I get asked that question many times, is how can we establish an ROI? And I'm sure that many of these other companies get questions around that, especially the SIs and even Gartner themselves. And I can tell you right now, there's no one that's going to be able to put something on paper for you that can say to you, if you spend this money, you're going to get this return. And so it's a hard one for many companies to make, and it's really the piece that's holding companies back from making the decisions. What is this all about? I mean, the last year and a half, we've seen a lot of leadership changes in SAP. Of course, with Bill McDermott dropping out and then Christian Klein coming now in as the CEO for the organization. You also remember last year, SAP took a major hit on their valuation, $38 billion. And, there was a lot of discussions going around what that really means. But I could tell you from the way I read it on the internet, the evaluation took that hit because of shareholder confidence. Shareholder confidence was the idea that are customers doing what SAP wants them to do? Are they making the moves and the strategy moves for what SAP wants them to do? And the lack of confidence, the clear indicator that the customers are not following the process that SAP wants, and that is part of the cause of them losing that amount of valuation. And so there was a lot of discussions going on the web. Christian Klein claims that it's because SAP never, moved their customers to the cloud fast enough. You can see Salesforce reckons this is not a industry issue. This is really an SAP issue. And I think there's a lot of troubles unique to SAP, and that's how they position it. And of course, out of this, SAP charters a new course to accelerate cloud. And as you can imagine, and that SAP is now pushing HEC, but they're also pushing Rise with SAP, and they're building this whole framework to do that, which is still very difficult to understand what that means to companies. But SAP right now is in a position that they need to get their customers on board to make this move. And they're doing it through different tactics, which is currently not working. And I expect it will continue this path for many years to come. SAP is also doing something which is a hat trick. And by the way, I put all the links in these presentations. You can go look at it. But there's some research from Brightwork Research and Snow Software where you can actually go look at what it means and how SAP's position. But I think the important thing is when SAP reports to you that they have a certain amount of cloud customers, cloud could mean many different things to many different people. But SAP's version of cloud is it's almost like making you feel that customers are adopting S4 and adopting HANA and are moving into a public cloud solution. Well, that's really a hat trick because that's not the way this operates. The reality is, from the diagram, and you can see in this diagram, that basically SAP is basically saying you will always have a private edition, and that private edition will be hosted by SAP and will be run as a managed services, and I will report it out to the industry that I have just adopted or have just received or signed up another cloud customer. It's meant to give the idea that many customers are making the move, when the reality is it doesn't fit in your traditional cloud type solutions, specifically around software as a service. It's not what you would get from a Workday or from a Salesforce. It's not the same model. And that is why Salesforce says this is very unique to SAP and what issues they're dealing with. So what's the real deal? And this is the Forrester slide, and I put it in there, and you can see some comments from Salesforce there as well. The reality is not everyone sees SAP's fourth quarter of 2020 results and Rise with SAP program as a clear sign that SAP assured of the future. In other words, really not everyone sees it, that all these things that SAP is doing is really going to move their customer base with them. We understand that SAP will sell other products and will expand in other business, but their biggest business is their existing customers, and they have to convince the existing customers that the future is with SAP and that the SAP is going to solve this. But they also have to do it in a way that says, this makes reasonable sense to the customers to do this. And if the product is like for like, yes, there's some performance improvements around HANA. There's some other technologies as well. But the reality is the core ERP is not changing significantly, and they've had a really difficult time with that. So and as you can imagine, more than half of their revenues come from software support. And so the big move is taking that money and moving it with the future, and then, of course, increasing that growth with the existing customers. That is the big achievement that SAP is trying to do and trying to get done. And that is the reason you have all these different programs. And Rise, I'll give a slide in a few minutes on that, but the reality is all of these is another way to say, hey, let me help you with this thing to get you there quicker. SAP strategy, as you go down this path and, you engage in SAP account reps and account folks in terms of speaking to SAP, SAP has a standard story for you. They basically have a standard message for their customers. And that standard message is, how do I get you off ECC? How do I get you onto SAP only database? And how do I get you to move to S4? And so their strategy is very simple, is let me speak to you about HEC. Let me see if I can convince you that we can take your infrastructure. We can put managed services on top of that. By doing that, then I've already got you locked into us at one point. The next step is to get you off all your non-SAP database. And as an example, SAP is offering to move you from Oracle or other databases to not only HANA, it depends on the version of software, but they'll move you to Sybase as an interim, they'll move you to MaxDB as an interim, and then they'll move you to HANA at the end results. And so the idea is, if I can get you into HEC, which is sort of managed services, and then I can get you onto HANA database, now I've really got you locked in, because Once you make that choice, you've sort of taken the step to SAP's overall strategy. And then the ultimate strategy is to move you from ECC into S4 and into a subscription-based pricing model. That's the ultimate path that SAP is trying to achieve with every one of their customers. The question of brown versus greenfield and, do I upgrade or do I do reimplementation? Well, the reality is there is no upgrade from ECC to S4, and you probably know that by now. But the reality is it is a different system. And what they're talking about is actually taking a conversion out of SAP ECC and layering it into an S4 migration. It's not taking care of your customizations. You're still going to have to look at doing that. And by the way, if you do it in ECC or you do it in S4, the reality is it's going to be no different because the same amount of work is going to have to be done. And so the point is, if you do brownfield, that means you're going to do a conversion onto the existing S4 platform and you'll run your business on there. If you do greenfield, you're going to go back and say, let's start again and look at the business processes, look at the customizations, go through all of that exercise. And SAP understands that. And Christian Klein made a comment the 27th of January 2021, which says there's no value in taking a legacy system from on-premise into cloud if you don't clean up the inefficiencies of old code, outdated needs and processes. Basically, what he's saying to you is, if you're just doing a brownfield, that's not the right path. You need to go back and redo all of the stuff. And so that's a challenge for customers. Basically, it's saying, let's re-implement same for same. In other words, I'm going to get the same functionality when I move to S4. What is RISE? It's BtaaS, which is Business Transformation as a Service. So as you think of platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, well, now here is what SAP is offering is basically RISE with SAP. Let's consolidate all our agreements. Why don't you come to SAP? We'll help you through the transition of that. We'll take care of your infrastructure. We'll take care of your managed service needs. And at the same time, we will be able to help you move from your legacy technologies, which SAP refers to as legacy, is all your ECC and older systems, moving them onto the S4 platform and newer systems. And this is a comment from ZDNet. Basically, SAP launches RISE with SAP, Business Transformation as a Service. With RISE, with SAP, the company is taking more control of customer relationship and establishing a path for customers by a partner network to provide that support. Well, this is a new one where SAP is not only putting their foot into managed services, but now they're also putting their foot into actually doing the implementation, which the SIs typically we've done in the past years, and doing that by using the existing SI partners. And it's only a select set of partners, so it's not that you have many choices in there. I couldn't imagine how expensive this would be for the customer and how difficult it would be for a customer when they don't have any choice or controls around how they go about this. So I think the important thing on RISE is trying to understand the details behind it, what it really means, what does it look like, what does the partner network look like, what does the pricing model look like, how much is this going to cost me at the end of the day, and what does this mean to me within the first few years, the next several years? Because I always say at the end of the day, sometimes decisions made earlier with some sort of incentives will change over a period of time and you'll end up paying much more than you ever expected. So make sure you understand what you will be getting with the service. 2025, as you imagine, I actually made this projection a year ago or 2 years ago as well, where basically SAP continues to buckle to customers' needs. The idea that SAP can put a deadline out there and say to customers that 2025, I'll stop your mainstream support is really a ridiculous idea, because essentially, if a customer doesn't choose to do that, is it a situation where they will be forced to make a different choice and SAP will just lose all that support revenues? Well, we know that's really what controls this process. And so the reality is customers are making this decision. It's not a decision that SAP is making. It's the reality is they may put a date out there with the idea to create a fear factor. And I know it does. Many companies ask me, I'm scared of this. What am I going to do with this? I say don't be scared, because you as a customer controls that date. I think the most important thing, SAP does not get it, and I'm not sure that is the case. I really think SAP really ignores the ultimate issue here. By extending the date, it's not solving the problem for companies. Companies really want SAP to come and help them identify a business case for making this move. In other words, tell me how I can increase revenues or increase my business or decrease my cost and get a better product that gives us higher levels of efficiencies and savings. SAP is not doing that for the company, their customers. No one can do that. And so I think the overall strategy with S4 and HANA is somewhat of a flawed idea because essentially it's not delivering the same value as companies had moving from like an R2 or in the old days, with Y2K into a ECC environment or an R3 environment. And I think it's really difficult for SA to make that happen. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge. Even with the 2-year extension, there simply aren't the skills and resources to evaluate the migration by that deadline. We know that many companies, large organizations out there, took 15, maybe 5, 10, 15 years to implement. Well, to be honest with you, if they were going to make that migration with 500 ECC systems out there, they would have had to have started this way back. And so those companies are the larger revenue companies. And I tell you, at the end of the day, those are the ones that are going to control the deadline. They will be the ones that will drive it. My prediction is it's going to, the mainstream support will probably last to 2035. By that time, most companies have made some decisions and have made some migration. So I don't think it's going to happen here by 2027. I think it's maybe 10 years later than that, or even 15 years later than that. SAP Admits their biggest challenge. They were asked, Jürgen Müller was asked the question, what is SAP's number one challenge? And he made this comment. He says, our biggest challenge is to stay focused on our customers. And he's really talking about our existing customers. And the idea behind this is, what does that mean? I think, the idea that Bill McDermott always focused on the idea of trust, creating a relationship between SAP and its customers built on trust. I don't know if you remember this, but Sapphire a couple of years ago, Bill McDermott said, you trusted us in the old days with R3, moving from R2 to R3 and all the things that we've done over the years. SAP, Bill McDermott asked, he said, we as SAP would like you to trust us once again. Trust us once again, that will take you to the future. And so the idea of that trust was there. And I think what's happening, there may have been that trust. I do remember in all my career, many companies looked at SAP as, I'm a blue company. I'm going to be, everything we buy is SAP, but you don't see that anymore. And so there is a disconnect in the relationship there. And I think this is what Jürgen Miller was referring to. Well, the big question to you as a customer is, what are you going to do? What is going to be my next step? And you have to be very cautious about this. In other words, the next step you make may end up driving all the decisions you make. As an example, like I mentioned, if you move into HEC for a moment, it's going to be a challenge for you to pull away from that. If you replace your databases with HANA and you start to upgrade your software in that, well, then you're losing your database choices behind that. If you sign up with RISE, well, then you just gained in SAP the keys for them to drive your roadmap. And that ultimately, all of this ultimately is going to end up driving what it costs you and the outcome of that. And so the question is, if I take this next step, have I made a decision that I agree to all of that? And the most important thing, know that SAP is trying to lock you in. They love that strategy, and they've seen it with Oracle and other companies and that. So they want you to do that. They want you to hand over their roadmap, database, everything, implementation, the whole thing. They want you to abandon the software you're running today and start again. They want you to charter you a full migration and absorb the additional costs with little to no ROI. This is what SAP is asking you to do. So take the next step and you will agree to all of the above. I wanted to run a little cost thing. You know what I do hear from companies that they say, we've made a decision, we're going to do an S4 implementation, and they're going down that path. One question I always ask them, have you started to sort of look at what this is going to cost you? In other words, the cost of HANA database, or the cost of S4, or the cost to implement this stuff. Many companies say, no, we made the decision, but we haven't looked into that. And then what I hear from many companies, they come back in a few months later or a year later and basically say, once we started to look at that, we couldn't make that decision. There is no way we could even build a project around that, or we could actually charter a project, or even get stakeholder approval to move forward that project. So companies are sitting back and saying, I cannot afford this migration. I cannot demonstrate the value, and I cannot afford the migration. The data in here I got from Brightwork Research, but you can see for HANA pricing, a medium-sized instance. And by the way, very important, the way HANA is priced is by gigabytes. So quite frankly, if you have an old system sitting in an ECC system that you've never archived out there, SAP is telling you you need to archive, because if you don't archive, you're going to be paying a lot more than you pay today for your database. That is guaranteed. And depending on how many instances you have in terms of, development, QA, production, sandbox, or other instances, it can be very expensive for you from a HANA database pricing perspective. And so, yeah, you can see after a 50% footprint reduction, which is an archive, and you're sitting between 1,000 to 2,000 gigabytes, ultimately it can cost you about 6.2 million and another 1.24 million every year from a support fee perspective. So you need to, before you switch out your database, you really need to understand what that means. And you have to ask yourself the question, is the value I get about that slight performance hit going to actually be able to offset this cost? And I think most companies will tell you no. And then from an S4 migration perspective, purely brownfield, think about this as purely an upgrade. If you want to call it a technical upgrade, it's going to cost me 1 to 3 million, depending on my level of customizations and the complexity. And that you'll get from most of your SIs today, and you'll understand what that would mean to you. But before you make the decision, you really need to sort of go out there and say, let's charter this thing. Let's start working on the pricing and make sure we understand it. In summary, just to summarize this all up, I think my recommendations to every customer over the years has changed slightly, but it all comes back to the same stories. Choose value versus fear. Do not let the fear drive your decisions, 2025, 2027, 2030. Do not let those decisions drive you, because what you're going to be doing then is you're basically going to just be going through this implementation, paying the additional cost, and getting yourself into a situation where you can't even control the cost into the future. So make a decision purely around business. In companies that have sort of downsized the SAP system, one thing they sort of all say is we sort of looked at what is best of breed, and we've made decisions around best of breed. And it's not one vendor, it could be multi-partners. But the idea is we're going to get the best software, we're going to get the best solution for what we expect to pay, and they've made decisions around that. Be wary, and I caution this because what SAP tells you and what the market tells you, and many times what the analysts will tell you, and the SIs are always in favor of what the vendor strategy is. And I recommend to you is dig deep into the information, make sure you understand it, make sure you understand the contracts, make sure you understand all the information. Be careful for what you agree to until you understand what the ultimate outcome is going to be like for you. So be wary about the strategies, make sure you understand it. If it's just purely heck, remember that's not the end game. That's just the starting point for SAP strategy. Don't fall to pressure. Short-term incentives may have long-term impacts. Pressure means, your SI pushing you, your SAP pushing you to make decisions. In many cases, your business saying, hey, we want a new system. Or the IT folks within your organization saying, we want a new system, we want to learn new skills. If you fall to the pressure, you may get some short-term incentives from some of the vendors, like SAP with EC. They'll give some concession there. They'll give you some concessions on licensing. But the ultimate end game is not for them to get less money for you, but to get a lot more money from you. And they hope to take control of that so that they can do that. Take your time, spend where needed. With COVID, I know a lot of workforces become mobile. SAP sees it as an opportunity just to say, well, let me take you all into the cloud. I don't see it that way. I see it that you need to make good decisions around your infrastructure and your platform and make sure that you have a good, solid model around that, but also that your workforce can actually support your systems and that your business can continue doing business. That is not a strategy where just taking ECC into a hosted SAP environment is going to solve that for you. So make sure that you take your time and know that this will clarify itself. I do believe as we go down this path with where we've seen the SAP customer base today and even 3-4 years ago, I do believe it will take time, but it will work itself out. That brings us to Spinnaker Support. And I think, I've mentioned third-party support out throughout this process. We consider ourselves a very, a partner of customers, of SAP customers, not just SAP. We do Oracle, we do many different other products. But the point behind it is we provide value for what a customer would expect in a way that they can optimize their system and take advantage of the assets they have and then spend the money in areas that is important to them. So what we do is we do break fix. We fix the product if it breaks. We do global tax and regulatory, which means if you have financial updates that you're doing, financial reporting, if you have payroll that you have to run in SAP, Spinnaker will provide that. We also give you a services above that, which means you can use our resources for any questions about technologies, how to do things, configuration, roadmap strategies. So we're giving you an extra level of support as well above what you get from your support from SAP. We also go one step further on the security side, the idea of encapsulating and support and securing your product and doing it proactively. That's much more than what you're going to get from your vendors today. And so that's an extra level of security which all companies need in today's world. And then lastly, we do a technology advisory service. The idea of how does the SAP products run on all the technology stack? What should I be considering? Should I do this or should I do that? Should I go to infrastructure and service? Should I look at certain partners? How should I evaluate that process? Spinnaker can help answer all of those questions. And so those are services you get under our model at a much reduced cost to what you pay in SAP. Gives you time to spend the money in the right places. So why is Spinnaker Support trusted by many of the world's most respected and recognized brands? Well, first of all, the pricing is built around the idea that, hey, we will take care of you. We'll give you a 15-minute response time for P1 and P2. We'll give you the highest level of expertise in the resource area, and then we'll make sure we price appropriately. We're not going to price it in a way that says, if you've got all these licenses and you've got the shelfware and you're paying SAP so much, how do we compete with that? We're actually going to compete in a way that pricing is going to be very attractive and the level of support is going to be much more than what you've been used to from an SAP perspective. We built to ensure fast issue resolution. The idea is we're not fixing bugs for many different companies. We're fixing bugs in your environment, which means we can turn those things around really fast and get your business back and up and running. Of course, I mentioned the security, full stack of security, making sure that your environments are very well protected. We also do full support for products life. In other words, you can run ECC from what we consider, you can run it in the next 15, 20 years. It all depends on how you want to do business. We have customers that are still on 4.5 systems. We have contracts that, we get in that to other parts of the world like Asia that they run. They want 10-year contracts. They don't want a short-term contract. They see this as a long-term effect. And then we very conveniently have additional services and different products. And it all starts with you just having a conversation with us, and we can really articulate what it would look like to you. We can put you in touch with our customers, and you can have reference calls, and then we can take you through the whole process, and we can actually take your team through that as well. We do take the time to make sure that your whole organization understands exactly what this would look like. So as I come to the end of this, I really hope that you get a lot of value out of it. I would appreciate any calls or questions you have. If you have a question you would like to ask me, or if you'd like to have a discussion, feel free to reach out to Spinnaker. You can go to our website. You can reach out to me through any of the social media channels. But the reality is, reach out to us. I'd love to spend some time chatting to you about who we are, what we do, and how we can benefit that. I've been in this SAP space for many, many years. I've done a lot of different things on the SAP space. I understand what's important to the customers. I understand support organizations, so I can speak to all different levels of parts of the organizations, but I can also help you think through this, and I can take you step by step through this process. As I went through this, I don't want you to feel that I created a lot of the research in that, and that it's only my opinion. A lot of this is research that's freely available on the web. As you know, Gartner's available there, Forrester's out there. There's a lot of other technology analysts. There's a lot of organizations or things that you can go and look at. A few that I did use here, of course, is I did use Gartner, I did use Forrester. But I also used a company called Snow Software, really around licensing and in terms of what HANA means to you. Brightwork Research, I used a lot of information about, how SAP's strategy actually really ends up looking for you. And so I've used a lot of the information on the web that you have access to sort of give you a perspective that this is just not a Shawn or a Spinnaker Support approach. This is really what is the data and the research there. So again, thank you for joining. Feel free to reach out to me at any point in time.